There is perhaps no doubt that Viserys Targaryen was a cruel and foolish man. He hurt his servants, beat his sister, and he even dared to threaten her unborn baby with a steel sword before the DOTHRAKI Khal invades Dothrak. Viserys was foolish, vain, and absolutely mad. But was he always like that, or were the circumstances that led to his behavior? In the books, Daenerys often reminisces about Viserys in her youth, not about the man that he later became, but the sweet boy that he had once been. There are many times throughout the books when she has fond memories about Viserys, and where she reflects on how much she knows about the world because Viserys was there to teach her. She tells Jorah this in A Game of Thrones. "You do not understand, sir," she said. "My mother died giving me birth, and my father and my brother Rhaegar even before that. I would never have known so much as their names if Viserys had not been there to tell me. He was the only one left, the only one." So though Viserys grew up to be an awful young man, it's interesting to realize how differently Daenerys remembers him, and what her memories actually say about who Viserys once was as a young boy. It begs the question, was Viserys always mad, or was his behavior as a result of the events of his life? It's probably the case that Viserys was mad even as a kid, but it would be hard to divorce his troubling nature from the fact that he was mostly raised by his father, the Mad King Aerys Targaryen. The Mad King was, as his name suggests, mad and paranoid. He would never let Viserys out of his sight, especially after the many stillbirths, miscarriages, and infant deaths that he and Queen Rhaella had experienced trying to conceive a second child. Though these incidents were probably devastating and horrible for both Queen Rhaella and King Aerys, the Mad King went further in his grief until it became paranoia. He thought that perhaps Queen Rhaella was poisoning the children, probably drinking moon tea when she was pregnant and possibly smearing poison on her nipples to kill the infants. Therefore, when Viserys was born, he never let him anywhere near the queen, or anyone else for that matter, and he took strict measures to ensure that Viserys was as safe and as isolated as can be. The young prince was watched by the Kingsguard all day and every day. No one was allowed to come near him, not his mother or his brother, not even a maester. His food was to be tasted before he consumed it, and any gifts that were sent to him were burned before he even saw them, lest they be poisoned or cursed. Therefore, the only person who was ever really allowed to see Viserys was his father, the Mad King himself. And it's possible that the Mad King indoctrinated Viserys and filled his head with supremacist views on the Targaryens and their Valyrian history. This is why Viserys believes that he is superior and comes across as vain and conceited to others. We see the influence of these ideas not only on him, but also on Daenerys. Daenerys also believes that the Targaryens shouldn't mate with the beasts of the field, and in A Dance with Dragons, she visits the sick masses, believing that as a Targaryen, she can't be afflicted by diseases. This is something that Viserys taught her, and it's possible that Viserys himself was taught this by his father, Aerys. The Mad King decorated the walls of the Red Keep with dragon skulls, and probably believed that he was also a dragon himself.
I don't think he expected to die. He meant to band with the rest of us and rise again. Reborn as a dragon, turn his enemies to ash.
In Game of Thrones, Viserys also tells his servant about how his father used to teach him about the dragons and how he'd give him a sweet whenever he got the names right.
I'll tell you what I have seen. They're skulls. They used to decorate the throne room in the Red Keep. When I was very young, just 3 or 4, my father used to walk me down the roads, and I'd recite their names for him. When I got them all right, he'd give me a sweet.
So it's clear that Viserys and the Mad King were close, and that the Mad King indoctrinated Viserys with his own beliefs of Targaryen supremacy. When his father died, Viserys was probably very traumatized, especially if he believed that his father was a dragon, and that as king, no one would ever dare do him harm.
I slit his throat to make sure that didn't happen.
But Viserys was only 8 years old when his father was killed, and the only parent that was left to him was his mother, Queen Rhaela. Viserys had to flee to Dragonstone to escape Robert Baratheon's wrath, especially after the usurper's followers killed Rhaegar's children and Elia Martell. But his stay on the Smoky Island would unfortunately be a short one. Viserys' life would be a series of continuous flights, never safe and always looking over his shoulder. On Dragonstone, his mother had died giving birth to Daenerys, and he still couldn't stay long enough to grieve for her because Stannis was quickly descending on the island. Though it's unclear how close Viserys grew to be with his mother, there are passages throughout the books which suggest that there was a fond relationship between them. In the beginning, Queen Rhaela had even tried her best to protect Viserys against Aerys' madness, but she ultimately failed in doing that and was no longer allowed to see him. Regardless, Viserys clearly grew fond of his mother, because when she died he kept a crown as they fled to the free cities. Daenerys says that it was the only ounce of joy that he could find in such hard times, and those times were indeed very difficult for them. Viserys and Daenerys were now the last Targaryens, and Viserys had the responsibility of restoring his family's dynasty. At the same time, he also had the responsibility of raising and protecting his little sister, especially after the death of their guardian, Sir William Darry, who had remained loyal to the Targaryens till his death. When Sir William died, his servants stole most of his valuable belongings, and they kicked Viserys and Dany out into the streets. From then on, their survival depended solely on Viserys, and the last remaining Targaryens were now exiles. It's fair to say that Viserys did a rather good job at keeping them alive for all those years. In the books, it's said that he would accept invites from the wealthy and powerful magisters and princes of the free cities. These powerful men would get the privilege of hosting the lost Targaryens, and in exchange, Viserys and Dany would be given shelter, food, and all the hospitalities fit to their stations. However, this changed the longer Robert Baratheon sat on the Iron Throne, and in time, Viserys and Daenerys were exiles once again, beggars in the street. The people of the free cities called Viserys the Beggar King, and this was true because they were poor and starving, and they had nowhere to go for years. Daenerys often recalls these tough times in the books, but she also remembers Viserys sweetly during these times as well. She once thinks Viserys had been stupid and vicious, she had come to realize, yet sometimes she missed him all the same. Not the cruel, weak man he had become by the end, but the brother who had sometimes let her creep into his bed, the boy who told her tales of the Seven Kingdoms, and talked of how much better their lives would be once he claimed his crown. Dany remembers Viserys as someone who kept her safe, someone who cared for her and protected her, and that was probably true in the beginning. Dany is often described as being ethereally beautiful, even at a young age, so much so that even Illyrio Mopatis recalls being mad about her. Therefore, Viserys even probably had to protect her against men who would have tried to force themselves on her and do her harm, on top of protecting her from all the conspiracies against them. It's possible that in the beginning, Viserys genuinely loved and cared for his sister, even going so far as to sell his mother's crown in order to provide for them. However, all of this was hard for him, and selling his mother's crown was certainly the straw that broke the camel's back. Dany describes this moment as the last of his joy being drained from Viserys, because afterwards he began to grow resentful, and not just towards those that had stolen his father's throne or those that laughed at him in the streets, but also against Daenerys.
I'm the last hope of a dynasty, Mormont. The greatest dynasty this world has ever seen on my shoulders since I was 5 years old. And no one has ever given me what they gave to her in that tent. Never. Not a piece of it.
By far, one of the most foolish things that Viserys ever did was to follow Daenerys to the Dothraki Sea. It's one of the few times that Illyrio Mopatis's advice could fully be trusted, because it's mentioned that Mopatis had tried several times to get Viserys to stay with him in Pentos, but Viserys insisted on going along with Dany in order to make sure that Khal Drogo kept his word to give him an army. It's a terrible mistake on Viserys' part, because he has such disdain for the Dothrakis and he doesn't want to assimilate to their culture. He believes that as a Targaryen he is above them, and this doesn't bode well with the Dothrakis as a result.
The problem is that Viserys doesn't really understand the Dothraki, and that also he's arrogant. He has this sense of entitlement. He doesn't understand the Dothraki culture, and the Dothraki are not merchants. They do not buy or sell. They trade favors, and they do it in their own time. So they look at it as Dany was given to Khal Drogo as a gift, and in return he will give a gift of this golden crown that he has promised Viserys.
In the Dothraki Sea, we truly see how cruel and terrible Viserys truly is. But one also can't help but to feel a bit of pity for him, especially given everything that he's been through. It's sometimes clear that Viserys is envious of Daenerys, and the fact that she truly is like a queen in the Dothraki's eyes, something that Viserys has always longed for, but was never able to attain. It was too much for him to see his little sister getting everything that he felt as though he deserved, everything that he was told that he deserved by everyone around him. His father, his servants, even Illyrio Mopatis himself. For a long time, Illyrio filled Viserys' head with ideas of him sailing home with an army, telling him that one day, when he did, he would be welcomed by the small folk who were secretly awaiting his return. They would finally unfurl their dragon banners, which they sewed in private.
Soon you will cross the narrow sea and take back your father's throne. The people drink secret toasts to your health. They cry out for their true king.
It's these kinds of ideas that have shaped Viserys to be the vain, arrogant, and foolish man that he grew to become. Instead of undoing the Mad King's teachings, Illyrio only added onto them, and it turned Viserys into a madman himself. In the Dothraki Sea, Viserys realizes that he will never be the king that he's always thought himself to be. He is disobeyed by the people that he believes are his servants, humiliated by Dany, and even ordered around by her. He realizes that the only way to get what he wants is to force the hand of the Khal. But this is, of course, a foolish thought, the thought that gets him ultimately killed. He dies a king, but the beggar king, or the card king as the Dothraki refer to him. And Khal Drogo even keeps his promise by crowning him in the end. There's no doubt that Viserys Targaryen was a terrible man and a terrible brother. If Viserys had actually won the Iron Throne, it's possible that he would have been as terrible of a king as his father. All of his actions show that he was vain, arrogant, cruel, and utterly foolish. He would have been a nightmare as king, and everyone knew it. However, I do believe that he wasn't always terrible. I think that his ugly character is as a result of the ugly circumstances that befell him in his life, which had things turned out differently for him, then perhaps he would have been a better man and even a worthy king for the kingdoms. Viserys was dreadful in the end, but I also think that he was a tragic character since the beginning, and I do have some sympathy for him and what he's gone through. But what about you? What do you think about Viserys? Let me know down below in the comments section, and if you like this video, click the thumbs up button and subscribe for future content. Thank you for watching. Peace.